Chapter 30. The Vestibule. I have hardly kept my promise. The reader has decorated but little for himself as yet, but I have not, at least, attempted to bias his judgment. Of the simple forms of decoration which have been set before him, he has always been left free to choose, and the stated restrictions in the methods of applying them have been only those which followed on the necessities of construction previously determined. These having been now defined, I do indeed leave my reader free to build. And with what a freedom! All the lovely forms of the universe set before him, whence to choose, and all the lovely lines that bound their substance or guide their motion, and of all these lines, and there are myriads and myriads in every bank of grass and every tuft of forest, and groups of them divinely harmonized in the bell of every flower and in every several member of bird and beast, of all these lines, for the principal forms of the most important members of architecture, I have used but 3. What, therefore, must be the infinity of the treasure in them all? There is material enough in a single flower for the ornament of a score of cathedrals, but suppose we were satisfied with less exhaustive appliance, and built a score of cathedrals, each to illustrate a single flower. That would be better than trying to invent new styles, I think. There is quite a difference of style enough between a violet and a harebell for all reasonable purposes. Perhaps, however, even more strange than the struggle of our architects to invent new styles is the way they commonly speak of this treasure of natural infinity. Let us take our patients to us for an instant and hear one of them, not among the least intelligent. Quote, "It is not true that all natural forms are beautiful. We may hardly be able to detect this in nature herself, but when the forms are separated from the things and exhibited alone, by sculpture or carving, we then see that they are not all fitted for ornamental purposes, and indeed that very few, perhaps none, are so fitted without correction. Yes, I say correction, for though it is the highest aim of every art to imitate nature, this is not to be done by imitating any natural form, but by criticizing and correcting it. Criticizing it by nature's rules gathered from all her works, but never completely carried out by her in any one work. Correcting it by rendering it more natural, i.e., more conformable to the general tendency of nature, according to that noble maxim recorded of Raphael, subquote, that the artist's object was to make things not as nature makes them, but as she would make them. As she ever tries to make them, but never succeeds, though her aim may be deduced from a comparison of her efforts, just as if a number of archers had aimed unsuccessfully at a mark upon a wall, and this mark were then removed, we could, by the examination of their arrow marks, point out the most probable position of the spot aimed at, with a certainty of being nearer to it than any of their shots. I didn't expect any central limit theorem in here." End block quote. I had thought that, by this time, we had done with that stale, second-hand, one-sided, and misunderstood saying of Raphael's, or that at least, in these days of purer Christian light, men might have begun to get some insight into the meaning of it. Raphael was a painter of humanity, and assuredly there is something the matter with humanity, a few devrebes, more or less, wanting in it. We have, most of us, heard of original sin, and may perhaps in our modest moments conjecture that we are not quite what God or nature would have us to be. Raphael had something to mend in humanity. I should have liked to have seen him mending a daisy, or a peas blossom, or a moth, or a mustard seed, or any other of God's slightest works. If he had accomplished that, one might have found for him more respectable employment. To set the stars in better order, perhaps. They seem grievously scattered as they are, and to be of all manner of shapes and sizes, except the ideal shape and the proper size. Or to give us a corrected view of the ocean. That, at least, seems a very irregular and improvable thing. The very fishermen do not know this day how far it will reach, driven up before the west wind. Perhaps someone else does, but that is not our business. Let us go down and stand by the beach of it, of the great irregular sea, and count whether the thunder of it is not out of time. 1, 2, here comes a well-formed wave at last, trembling a little at the top, but on the whole orderly. So crash by a couple of feet. Another. How now, impatient one? Couldn't you have waited till your friend's reflux was done with, instead of rolling yourself up with it in that unseemly manner? You go for nothing. A fourth, and a goodly one at last. What think we of yonder slow rise in crystalline hollow without a flaw? Steady, good wave. Not so fast, not so fast. Where are you coming to? By our architectural word, this is too bad. 2 yards over the mark, and ever so much of you in our face besides, and a wave which we had some hope of behind there, broken all to pieces out at sea, and laying a great white tablecloth of foam all the way to shore, as if the marine gods were to dine off it. Alas, for these unhappy arrow shots of nature, she will never hit her mark with these unruly waves of hers, nor get one of them into the ideal shape if we wait for 1,000 years. Let us send for a Greek architect to do it for her. He comes, the great Greek architect, with measure and rule. Will he not also make the weight for the winds, and weigh out the waters by measure, and make a decree for the rain, and a way for the lightning of the thunder? He sets himself orderly to his work, and behold, this is the mark of nature, and this is the thing into which the great Greek architect improves the sea. And then there's 2 Greek words. Shall I translate them? What do they say? Can't read that. Sea. Was it this, then, that they wept to see from the sacred mountain? Those wearied ones? But the sea was meant to be irregular. Yes, and were not also the leaves, and the blades of grass, and in a sort, as far as may be, without mark of sin, even the countenance of man? Or would it be pleasanter and better to have us all alike, and numbered on our foreheads, that we might be known one from the other? Is there, then, nothing to be done by man's art? Have we only to copy and again copy forever the imagery of the universe? Not so. We have work to do upon it. There is not any one of us so simple nor so feeble, but he has work to do upon it. But the work is not to improve, but to explain. This infinite universe is unfathomable, inconceivable in its whole. Every human creature must slowly spell out and long contemplate such part of it as may be possible for him to reach, then set forth what he has learned of it for those beneath him, extricating it from infinity as one gathers a violet out of grass. One does not improve either violet or grass in gathering it, but one makes the flower visible, and then the human being has to make its power upon his own heart visible also, and to give it the honor of the good thoughts it has raised up in him, and to write upon it the history of his own soul. And sometimes he may be able to do more than this, and to set it in strange lights, and display it in 1,000 ways before unknown, ways specially directed to necessary and noble purposes, for which he had to choose instruments out of the wide armory of God. All this he may do, and in this he is only doing what every Christian has to do with the written as well as the created word, rightly dividing the word of truth. Out of the infinity of the written word he also has to gather and set forth things new and old, to choose them for the season and the work that are before him, to explain and manifest them to others, with such illustration and enforcement as may be in his power, and to crown them with the history of what, by them, God has done for his soul. And in doing this, is he improving the word of God? Just such difference as there is between the sense in which a minister may be said to improve a text to the people's comfort, and the sense in which an atheist might declare that he could improve the book, which, if any man shall add unto, there shall be added unto him the plagues that are written therein. Just such difference is there between that which, with respect to nature, man is, in his humbleness, called upon to do, and that which, in his insolence, he imagines himself capable of doing. I might have to charge my phone. Have No Fear is coming up next. I'm just going to plug in my phone. Have no fear, have no fear. Have no fear, therefore, reader, in judging between nature and art, so only that you love both. If you can love one only, then let it be nature. You are safe with her, but do not then attempt to judge the art to which you do not care to give thought or time. But if you love both, you may judge between them fearlessly. You may estimate the last by its making you remember the first and giving you the same kind of joy. If, in the square of the city, you can find a delight, finite, indeed, but pure and intense, like that which you have in a valley among the hills, then its art and architecture are right. But if, after fair trial, you can find no delight in them, nor any instruction like that of nature, I call on you fearlessly to condemn them. We are forced, for the sake of accumulating our power and knowledge, to live in cities. But such advantage as we have in association with each other is in great part counterbalanced by our loss of fellowship with nature. We cannot all have our gardens now, nor our pleasant fields to meditate in at eventide. Then the function of our architecture is, as far as may be, to replace these, to tell us about nature, to possess us with memories of her quietness, to be solemn and full of tenderness, like her, and rich in portraitures of her, full of delicate imagery of the flowers we can no more gather, and of the living creatures now far away from us in their own solitude. If ever you felt or found this in a London street, if ever it furnished you with one serious thought or one ray of true and gentle pleasure, if there is in your heart a true delight in its grim railings and dark casements and wasteful finery of shops and feeble coxcombry of clubhouses, it is well. Promote the building of more like them. But if they never taught you anything, and never made you happier as you passed beneath them, do not think they have any mysterious goodness nor occult sublimity. Have done with the wretched affectation, the futile barbarism of pretending to enjoy. For as surely as you know that the meadow grass, meshed with fairy rings, is better than the wood pavement cut into hexagons, and as surely as you know the fresh winds and sunshine of the upland are better than the choke damp of the vault, or the gaslight of the ballroom, you may know, as I told you that you should, that the good architecture, which has life and truth and joy in it, is better than the bad architecture, which has death, dishonesty, and vexation of heart in it, from the beginning to the end of time. We're not done yet. And now, come with me, for I have kept you too long from your gondola. I'm trying to prop this up. Come with me on an autumnal morning through the dark gates of Padua, and let us take the broad road leading towards the east. It lies level for a league or two between its elms, and vine festoons full laden, their thin leaves veined into scarlet hectic, and their clusters deepened into gloomy blue, then mounts an embankment above the Brenta, and runs between the river and the broad plain, which stretches to the north in endless lines of mulberry and maize. The Brenta flows slowly but strongly, a muddy volume of yellowish-gray water that neither hastens nor slackens, but glides heavily between its monotonous banks, with here and there a short, babbling eddy twisted for an instant into its opaque surface, and vanishing as if something had been dragged into it and gone down. Dusty and shadeless, the road fares along the dike on its northern side, and the tall white tower of Dolo is seen trembling in the heat mist far away, and never seems nearer than it did at first. Presently you pass one of the much vaunted villas on the Brenta, a glaring spectral shell of brick and stucco, its windows with painted architraves like picture frames, and a courtyard paved with pebbles in front of it, all burning in the thick glow of the feverish sunshine, but fenced from the high road for magnificence' sake, with goodly posts and chains. Then another, of Q Gothic with Chinese variations, painted red and green. A third, composed for the greater part of dead wall, with fictitious windows painted upon it, each with a pea green blind and a classical architrave in bad perspective. And a fourth, with stucco figures set on the top of its garden wall, some antique, like the kind to be seen at the corner of the new road, and some of clumsy, grotesque dwarfs with fat bodies and large boots. This is the architecture to which her studies of the Renaissance have conducted modern Italy. The sun climbs steadily and warms into intense white the walls of the little piazza of Dolo, where we change horses. Another dreary stage among the now divided branches of the Brenta, forming irregular and half-stagnant canals, with one or two more villas on the other side of them, but these of the old Venetian type, which we may have recognized before at Padua, and sinking fast into utter ruin, black and rent and lonely, set close to the edge of the dull water, with what were once small gardens beside them, kneaded into mud, and with blighted fragments of gnarled hedges and broken stakes for their fencing, and here and there a few fragments of marble steps, which have once given them graceful access from the water's edge, now settling into the mud in broken joints, all aslope and slippery with green weed. At last the road turns sharply to the north, and there is an open space covered with bent grass on the right of it. But do not look that way. 5 minutes more, and we are in the upper room of the little inn at Mestre, M-E-S-T-R-E, glad of a moment's rest in shade. The table is, always I think, covered with a cloth of nominal white and perennial gray, with plates and glasses at due intervals, and small loaves of a peculiar white bread made with oil, and more like knots of flour than bread. Is it focaccia? The view from its balcony is not cheerful. A narrow street with a solitary brick church and barren campanile on the other side of it, and some conventual buildings, with a few crimson remnants of fresco about their windows, and between them and the street a ditch with some slow current in it, and one or two small houses beside it, one with an arbor of roses at its door, as in an English tea garden. The air, however, about us, having in it nothing of roses, but a close smell of garlic and crabs, warmed by the smoke of various stands of hot chestnuts. There is much vociferation also going on beneath the window respecting certain wheelbarrows which are in rivalry for our baggage. We appease their rivalry with our best patience and follow them down the narrow street. We have but walked some 200 yards when we come to a low wharf or quay at the extremity of a canal with long steps on each side down to the water, which latter we fancy for an instant has become black with stagnation. Another glance undeceives us. It is covered with the black boats of Venice. We enter one of them, rather to try if they be real boats or not, than with any definite purpose, and glide away, at first feeling as if the water were yielding continually beneath the boat and letting her sink into soft vacancy. It is something clearer than any water we have seen lately, and of a pale green, the banks only 2 or 3 feet above it, of mud and rank grass, with here and there a stunted tree, gliding swiftly past the small casement of the gondola as if they were dragged by upon a painted scene. Stroke by stroke, we count the plunges of the oar, each heaving up the side of the boat slightly as her silver beak shoots forward. We lose patience and extricate ourselves from the cushions. The sea air blows keenly by as we stand leaning on the roof of the floating cell. In front, nothing to be seen but long canal and level bank. To the west, the tower of Mestre is lowering fast, and behind it there have risen purple shapes of the color of dead rose leaves all round the horizon, feebly defined against the afternoon sky, the Alps of Bassano. Forward still, the endless canal bends at last and then breaks into intricate angles about some low bastions, now torn to pieces and staggering in ugly rents toward the water. The bastions of the fort of Malghera. Another turn, and another perspective of canal, but not interminable. The silver beak cleaves it fast. It widens. The rank grass of the banks sinks lower and lower, and at last dies in tawny knots along an expanse of weedy shore. Over it, on the right, but a few years back, we might have seen the lagoon stretching to the horizon, and the warm southern sky bending over Malamocco to the sea. Now, we can see nothing but what seems a low and monotonous dockyard wall, with flat arches to let the tide through it. This is the railroad bridge, conspicuous above all things. But at the end of those dismal arches, there rises, out of the wide water, a straggling line of low and confused brick buildings, which, but for the many towers which are mingled among them, might be the suburbs of an English manufacturing town. 4 or 5 domes, pale, and apparently at a greater distance, rise over the center of the line. But the object which first catches the eye is a sullen cloud of black smoke brooding over the northern half of it, and which issues from the belfry of a church. It is Venice. Merry Christmas.